from the Palestinian perspective, what's next?
What's next is what we asked for, that Israel should remove all the changes they have made in Al-Haram al-Sharif. Mr. Netanyahu has been playing games. He's removing the metal detectors, but he wants to impose cameras. He wants to impose individual search of every person who comes to pray. And he still keeps 8 gates out of 10 of the Haram al-Sharif closed. So practically all these measures are prohibiting freedom of prayer and freedom of access. The fact that he removed the metal detectors is another proof that these measures were not for security reasons. They are political actions to impose Israeli authority over Al-Haram al-Sharif, which is a site for Muslim prayer.
All right, let's go to Mr. Chef. You probably want to respond to your Palestinian counterpart. And also help us to understand, any further steps can Israel take?
Well, actually, I would rather not respond, but state what I think is the obvious for everyone in the region, which is that the first thing we need to do is to calm the situation down. And I think all moderate parties in the region here and those countries that neighbor Israel and the Palestinian Authority know that and should be involved in that. Let's recall, of course, how this started. There was a terror attack on the Temple Mount, on the Haram al-Sharif. 2 policemen were killed. So, of course, security measures were necessary. Now, questions can be asked about the way Israel reacted to this tactically, although it is fair to say that, any country would need to make sure that there were security measures. But at the end of the day, the problem here is the constant stream of incitement that Palestinians get about what is going on the Haram al-Sharif. Ultimately, for 50 years, there has been a status quo. For 50 years, Christians, Muslims and Jews have practiced their religion freely. The Jordanian Waqf controls the Haram al-Sharif. Jews are not allowed to pray there. And so there is, of course, freedom of religion there for everybody. People need to make sure that calm is restored, and moderate forces need to be involved in that right now.
When you talk about the terrorist attack, in fact, in the international press, it's rather a story about 3 Arab Israelis that have been in clash with the Israeli soldiers over there, or security forces over there. 3 died, and also 2 security soldiers also died as well. That is what is being covered when it comes to international press.
Exactly.
Of course,
they brought weapons.
When you talk about the history,
they brought weapons to this holy site.
When you talk about the history of this place, this has been quite a controversy throughout the decades, known to Muslims as the noble sanctuary and to the Jews as the Temple Mount. The site has been an enlightening rod for rival religions. It has triggered major confrontations in the past decades. For example, 1929, deadly riots broke out during the British Mandate. 1996, an Israeli decision to open a new entrance to the west of the plaza sparked also clashes that left more than 80 people dead in 3 days. On Friday, 3 Arab Israelis, as we mentioned earlier, opened fire at Israeli police near the site, killing 2 of them before they were also shot dead by security forces. So there are a lot of tragedies happening over there. And also we know recently there are several others injured as well. On July the 14th, several hundred injured rather, and several dead as well. So Mr. Barghouti, here's the thing. What can the Palestinians do when the metal detector have been removed?
Well, first of all, it's very simple. We want all the doors to the mosque to be opened immediately. We want them to remove these cameras that are not necessary. And we want Mr. Netanyahu to retreat from his demand that every person who comes to the mosque should be searched, because if you do that, people will not be able to enter. There will be thousands and thousands of people on Friday, and it's an impossible action. But more than that, I want to say that we want the freedom of access to Jerusalem. Let me tell you that 95% of the Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, including myself, are officially prohibited from entering Jerusalem.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Mr. Chef. I'm gonna ask Mr. Chef about that later. But I have to ask you, Mr. Barghouti, as well. We need to be fair in this discussion. What about the access for the Jews to come into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to the Jews also known as the Temple Mount, for them to practice their religion? Do you think that is possible for the Palestinians or for the Muslims?
We should speak about equality here. Jewish people have the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall to which they go and pray. We go to the Aqsa Mosque, to Haram al-Sharif, and pray. They would not let me go to the Wailing Wall. They would not let me stand there and move around there. They would not let any Muslim go there. But they are entering the Al-Haram al-Sharif as tourists all the time. And they insist on coming, but they want to change the nature of the situation there, which could, of course, create very big problem.
Okay.
During the last 10 days, the Israeli army has injured 1,100 Palestinians and killed 5 Palestinians during peaceful protests.
All right.
This is also unacceptable. This is violence. And if we talk about incitement, one Israeli minister has called for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Ethnic cleansing. He said, repeat the Nakba. Is that acceptable? This is spoiling the situation.
Let's go to Mr. Chef for the, whether you want to respond or not, but certainly there are questions for you. First of all, 95 of the Palestinians, as Mr. Barghouti explained, that do not have freedom of movement inside the Jerusalem. Secondly, you have ministers talking specifically sensitive phrases that is likely to create more tensions. Thirdly, Israeli soldiers going there trying to change the status quo. Respond, please.
Well, the status quo is not being changed. And I think this is the most important point, and we really need to understand this, because the incitement around the change in the status quo is costing lives. People are being killed because in Palestinian textbooks, on Palestinian media, parties like Mr. Barghouti's, the Fatah party, and Hamas are claiming that there are these changes being made, calling for days of rage.
I'm not Fatah,
and of course, if you call for days of rage, then people, my apologies. Then if you call for days of rage, then people are going to go out there in the streets and there is going to be rage. And this is the incitement that I'm talking about. So when moderate parties in the region, as far as the Israeli government is concerned, my understanding is there is no change in the status quo.
Okay.
The Palestinians need to communicate this in every single way they can to the Palestinian people. The Jordanians and the Egyptians and the Saudis are good parties to make sure that this calms down, and they are involved in that. Even the Americans are involved. But nothing will change, nothing will help until the Palestinians stop inciting.
We have both sides already voiced their opinions. Our audience all over the world, they are intelligent people. They are going to have their own judgment after both of you have made your argument. Now let's go to Ms. He here in Beijing. What I want to ask you is not to be the judge of this very controversial issue, but rather to help us understand the background of this, Ms. He. We understand this happened recently after earlier tensions, but only decades ago. So what made this thing spoil out of control at this point? We saw that happened after President Trump tried to have some kinds of discussion with the Israeli Prime Minister. We also see that happen with the bigger context of the division of the Middle East. Some countries, for example, Qatar vis-a-vis Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other issues. So how do you understand, under what circumstances, why is this thing after decades once again broke out?
I think because it's highly relates with this status of this holy city, Jerusalem. We know before, when the President Trump made some his political campaign, he even said once he get into the White House, he probably will change, like move the U.S. embassy all the way from Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem. So this is a very strong statement, because the status of Jerusalem has been both regarded as the holy city and and as the capital city,
right.
both for the two states, like especially Palestine state. So if you move U.S. embassy all the way to there, so that implies
but that
very
has not
clear.
been done yet, even though there were
Yes,
rhetorics
but this
about
is
it.
a signal has been sent out, and also now it's being a very strong, closer relations between U.S. and Israel right now. So maybe this gives Israel a little, some kind of this confidence.
Impetus.
Impotence and confidence now to make a further move. This is my analysis. Another thing is, when we look about the Middle East situation right now, the anti-IS, the Daesh or ISIL, so has been now achieved some point of victory because the city of Mosul has been taken away, and then people are also talking about we'll crash them very soon, even in Syria. So when those common enemy issue now has becoming disappeared or pushing to the marginal places, and then the old problem now coming up again, emerge as another focus. So because the Palestine-Israel conflict has been long serving as the root causes for all those the issues in the Middle East.
So let me go to you, Mr. Barghouti. We understand at the United Nations Security Council meeting, the U.S. permanent representative there, Ms. Haley, has certainly talking about the United States would do everything it can, quote, in order to calm down the situation over there about the controversy over the holy site. You also heard Jordanians, they are trying to play a role because they're the guardians of the site itself. Do you think the international community's efforts, at least from these very two different countries, different perspectives, going to be able to help your two countries, two states, Palestinians and Israelis, be able to handle it, at least for now? Mr. Barghouti.
Yes, of course, the international community has a responsibility and can do a lot, especially if everybody considers that the issue of Jerusalem is only a sign of the main problem. And the main problem has been the ongoing Israeli occupation of Palestinian land for 50 years. The failure of the international community in dealing with that issue and the failure of the international community of guaranteeing a two-state solution is the problem that we face today. The United States, unfortunately, cannot alone play that role because the United States is very biased to Israel. It's completely biased to Israel. And that's why the American envoys are finding great difficulty solving the issue. On the other hand, in Jordan now, there is almost an uprising among the Jordanian public because of the behavior of one Israeli guard in the Israeli embassy who killed two people in Jordan and injured a third one. He killed even the man, the owner of the house in which the Israeli embassy is. And to add insult to injury, Mr. Netanyahu congratulated that guard. This arrogance, this behavior of an occupier, this behavior of a colonialist is the main obstacle. We want peace. We want to live together. We want to have normal relationship. But we cannot have normal relationship as long as Israel is occupying us and oppressing us day after day and night after night.
All right, Mr. Chef, I want you to respond to that as well. First of all, the most important issue is the two states. Of course, the international community support that. And there seems to be many Israelis as well, Palestinians, of course, support that too. But the internal politics inside going on in Israel, how much of it is moving toward ever more extreme and hardline policy toward the Palestinians and about the issue? Do you think there has been some kind of heightened excitement, at least among the Israeli leadership right now, the administration, to take some of the more than earlier possible actions to make sure there could be possibility that it would have an upper hand on certain issue? Is that going to be dangerous, do you think, Mr. Chef, for Israel?
No, in no sense. In the last several years, there's actually been less building in Israeli settlements than before. you know, there is always in the situation, there is, you know, these narratives which seem to take control, which bear no relevance to the facts. Don't be absolutely clear that the Palestinians want this two-state solution. According to the latest polls, a majority of Israelis do, a minority of Palestinians do. And I think, you know, herein lies the problem. We need to see from the Palestinians an absolute acceptance of what a two-state solution means. That it means Israel and Palestine living side by side, that there is an idea in Palestinian society of what the contours of this looks like, that it is a peace which is everlasting. It's not a temporary thing until there is one state, Palestine. If you look at Palestinian textbooks, there is no idea there, no understanding there of what a two-state solution looks like. There's no real discussion of the Oslo process. So there is an absolute lack of education among the Palestinian public of this two-state solution. The Israeli population, you know, has gone for whatever peace process has been offered to them. You know, Israel made peace with Egypt, made peace with Jordan, went to Camp David in 2000, Olmert negotiated in 2008. Israelis will always come round to the acceptance of a negotiated two-state solution, but unfortunately within Israeli society, not politicians, society, there is more and more uncertainty about whether the Palestinians themselves actually want this thing.
All right, but Mr. Shab, you still haven't answered my question. If you can, very briefly, please. Is this so-called preemptive kinds of actions coming from the Israeli side, for example, about this holy site, which usually it is the Palestinians and the Muslims go there to pray, is that going to, in a way, eventually hurt Israel because it is trying to, at least in this case, change the status quo? Very briefly from you.
Again, there is no change in the status quo on the Temple Mount. This is the most sensitive place in the world. The Israeli government isn't stupid enough to, you know, continue to take a tactical security act when it's clearly not working and when it's clearly creating problems.
All right.
There is no change in the status quo. Nobody's perfect. The Israeli government certainly isn't perfect, but on this particular occasion, there is too much misinformation.
All right. You both argued about misinformation. Let's go to Ms. He for the final words as well. Ms. He, where to go from here? Tensions we see in the Middle East.
But I didn't
all the
say
spots
my,
are
opinion,
spoiling
madam.
right now. So what can we do at this point?
I think at least this gate issue, I think should be resolved because this has generated a new round of tension. So first of all, I think maybe it's a better and the wise way for the Israeli government to remove that gate.
They already.
Yeah, they have already.
Detector already removed. What's next?
They installed another thing, another kind of thing to replace that gate. So that's still, the problem's still there because we also need to respect the feelings of those prayers coming from Palestinian side because those people, they gathered there, they sit outside of this mosque to pray, to show this is the anger. So it cannot be tolerated like search one by one to get in. So this is the causes, and then we'll resolve that. But in the long run, of course, the status of Jerusalem and also the resettlement issue, that's still becoming the two biggest hurdles for the peace building between Palestine and Israel.